This time on the Shred School, we're going to learn our first flip trick, the shove it. This week on Shred School 101, we're going to learn the shove it and the pop shove it, which are technically a little bit different. We'll talk about that when we get there, but this is an exciting trick to learn because it's going to help you with two things. It's going to help you get used to the board doing something that you're not and to land back on it. And that's going to help you with kick flips and all that type of thing in the future. It's also going to help you learn how to commit. This is a really good way to ease yourself into that because the way the board spins, you can land it at any point, but you can get better at it. And once you get confident landing on the board over and over, it's going to help you land on the board doing different things. So this is a really good one to learn. Let's do it. To do a shove it, you don't really technically need to know anything else. This could be the first trick that you learn. The reason why I put it after the ollie, though, is because having some practice landing on the board is going to make it easier to land on the board after it spins. So I do suggest doing this after the ollie, but you don't really have to. There's a trick tip by a pro skater named Donovan Strain, and he talked about how this trick is like a tiger, this trick is like a lion, this one is like a white lion, and this one's a bobcat. Like, they're all similar, but one doesn't directly come after the next one. You don't necessarily have to know every little thing that makes up this trick to learn the trick. All right, so I'm suggesting a specific number of tricks in this specific order, but that's just on average. You don't need to know things to jump into something harder a lot of the times, even though it might help. All right. To start, let's figure out the best foot position for this trick. Your front foot should be around here and pretty pointy, and I mean like having your toe facing this way, like toward the nose slightly. The front foot's only job is to move. It just gets out of the way, lets your back foot do the work. All right. Having a slightly pointier foot placement is going to help you. You can use your ankle to kind of do it quicker. That's why I suggest doing it that way. You could put that foot anywhere. The trick would still work, but you might kind of trip over the board in the air, So just kind of have it here. You can experiment with where on the board exactly it goes. When I was first learning my first few tricks, I would have it way back here. I don't suggest it, but if it helps you for now, that's fine. All right. Back foot, have your weight around this part of the tail. You want it slightly on the tail itself, not right here, because you need to pop just a little bit. It's technically not a pop in this trick until we get to the pop shove it. That's what the difference is. We'll talk about that in a bit. But you do want to have enough on the tail to get a little bit of a jump like that. But it has to be on this end so you can push it back as the board starts to move. Essentially what you're doing is you're starting the board in a pivot, and then you jump and you try to land back on it. All right, that's the very basic form of what this trick is, and I do suggest doing the stationary to start with. We will adapt it when you start to roll with it, but it's a lot easier to learn this stationary at first. Get comfortable with it, get used to landing back on the board, and so I do suggest doing it stationary. And the cool thing about it is you can land at any point. You can land it halfway. You can do a 0% shove it, where you set up your feet, the board just kind of does this, but you jump and spin all the way around in the air and land backwards. That's perfectly fine. That's still going to give you experience landing back on the board, but after a while, get a little bit of a turn, until you're doing the whole shove it, landing back on the board like that. We'll get into troubleshooting in a minute, but when you do get used to it, you start to land on the board consistently, you've got it, you're probably going to be the way that I showed you before. The board's starting to pivot, you push it, and it lands over here. So how do you do it rolling forward? This is going to be a tough thing in skateboarding at all. That's why I don't usually suggest spinning stuff stationary. The only reason we're doing this is because it's so early, you might not be comfortable yet. But to get the board to stay with you as you roll this way instead of flying backwards, is do it a bit quicker, a bit snappier. You start to jump, and you really want to fling that board quickly. The quicker you can get away from a pivot and get into a spin, which is when the board's in the air, that's the more likely the board is to stay with you. If it pivots the whole time and starts to go this way, the board's not getting off the ground until here, it's going to go that way. So you want to be kind of quick and shove it and kind of push the board this way. In fact, with your back foot, kind of pull it this way as you do that shove it, and that should help keep the board with you. But That's only if you're going forward. There's nothing wrong with trying to learn this trick rolling backward. And in fact, I think it'd be a little bit easier to do it that way. Going fakie is harder because it's backwards, but aside from that, it's easier to do almost every spinning trick. I can't think of one off the top of my head that's harder going fakie, but yeah, so like anything off of the tail, if you're going backwards, you can still do it slower. You can still start it as a pivot and hop and push it along slightly, and the board will be traveling the same way you are. If you're going this way and the board wants to go this way as it pivots, you'll catch back up to it a little bit easier. So you can still do that. You can try it rolling either way. It'd be cool if you could learn both, but at least do one to get some confidence, get used to the board spinning while you're rolling and landing back on it. That's going to be a big help. All right, you've been trying to shove it for a while. You can't quite put it down. What are some of the things that can go wrong? The first one is you try to spin the board and it just doesn't go. It either doesn't spin all the way or it doesn't spin the whole way. You're having trouble getting it to come all the way around and being able to land back on it. This is almost definitely not a strength issue, okay? If you can jump and spin your body slightly, you can spin the board. Your board weighs a lot less than you. It's very small. You should be able to get it to do a 360 without too much trouble. I don't mean landing on it. I don't mean keeping it with you. But if you tried real hard and you scooped the board backward, it would fly over there. You could do a 360 or more. So it's not that type of an issue. It's more likely your technique and your timing. What you might be doing is just trying to push the tail backwards without any kind of pop. Now again, you're not popping technically, but you are still pushing down on the tail and getting the nose to come up. The nose comes up, the back truck starts to pivot, eventually the wheels slide and it gets up in the air. That's how the trick works. If you're jumping and just pushing the board back, that's not going to work. All right, so maybe try playing with your back foot slightly. I keep it here because the board won't flip that way. If I put it more on the corner of the tail like this, it will flip slightly. So that's a technique for me. But you know, you could play with that. If it's more on the tail, then that could help you get that pop that you might need. Another issue that can come about is landing badly and having the board flip. So this is something where the board spins most of the way or even all the way, but you land so badly with just the tip of your heel or the tip of your toe on it. You land, the board flips over and you trip and you go flying. For the most part, because the technique is not that wild, for the most part I would say it's a commitment issue. If you're just throwing the board, you're kind of afraid to watch it, you're afraid to prepare for it, you just kind of throw it and hope that it lands just right, that's how you end up getting hurt. If you're trying the trick carefully, you've done it, you're up in the air, you're watching it, then you should be able to land pretty solidly. If you're consistently landing so badly that you are falling, I would say it's most likely a commitment thing. Last thing I want you to keep an eye out for, which is also a commitment issue technically, is your back foot being planted on the ground. This is something you can do if you keep your weight pretty far back. Start the trick, you pop the tail, and then you plant this foot on the ground. Board comes around. You could even land it with this front foot, but you land like this. It could be your foot is on the ground before the board is even done doing the trick. You can't land the trick that way, of course. If you film it, it can help you diagnose some of these issues. But that's, again, a fear thing. If you are afraid to do the trick and land on it, you want to feel stable, you're going to plant that foot on the ground. That's something I used to do a lot when I was first learning my first few tricks. The thing I would suggest for getting better with commitment is find ways to land on the board that aren't tricks. You know, like just have the board in your hand, take a couple steps, jump and land on it. Or put it on the ground over there, walk up to it, jump up onto it. And if you do that, you're getting comfortable landing on that board. It'll make you feel more comfortable when it comes time to doing a shove it and landing on it. When you're comfortable with the shove-it, you can mix it with an ollie and turn it into a pop shove-it. The only difference between a shove-it and a pop shove-it is whether the tail touches the ground or not. And there can be some where it's borderline. The tail very lightly brushes on the ground, but for the most part, you're trying to pop the tail while you do the shove-it. And it can be a bit harder, you know, having more height makes it harder to commit. It's a little scarier, things like that. But it does spin easier. As far as like keeping it with you, if you're having trouble doing them going your normal direction, rolling forward and doing it off the tail, when you pop it, the wheels don't pivot as much. So you pivot a little bit, tail hits the ground, and then it'll spin a little bit easier. It'll stay with you easier. So there is some benefits to doing it this way. And if you can get some height on your shove-its, then you can do it into a grind, you can do it over something, you can clear a sidewalk crack with a pop shove-it. That's a little bit harder to do with a plain shove-it. All right, so front foot, same spot. Back foot, I tend to move back a little bit. As I said before, if I do it too close to the tip of the tail, the board will flip slightly. So I try to keep it right around here. And the major difference is that you want to change the focus. With a flat shove-it, a non-popped one, you're pushing the tail slightly and you're pushing back a lot. With a pop shove-it, you're popping down more and back less, because the more the board pops, the less of a flat spin it does. It kind of goes like this, you know, so it actually spins a little bit less this way technically because it's spinning backwards with that pop. So you want to pop it pretty quickly. You can't do this slow and casual. You've got to really slam it down and get the board going. But if you've got the technique to stay with it, you're comfortable landing on it, you know how to land it to, you know, if it didn't spin enough and all that type of stuff, you're comfortable landing back on that board, you should be able to get this one without too much trouble. My tip of the week is don't get married to your board stats yet. I'm talking the width of the board, size of the wheels, the hardness of the wheels, whether the trucks are high or low or mid, all of that stuff can change. And even the shape. If you get too committed to this board right now, you might be missing out on something that you might like more. You might like a freestyle board. You might like a pool board that's really big and has a flat tail. You might like something shaped where it's got some extra corners and things going on in it. These things might be better for you. Softer wheels might be better. Harder wheels might be better. You just don't know yet. So my suggestion is every time you get a new board or a new part for your board, try getting something different than you had before, and then you can really figure out what's best for you. For your homework this week, when you learn the shove-it, I want you to try a shove-it with your board backwards, like this. Your tail is the smaller one, the nose is the big flat one for the most part. Again, we talked about experimenting with shapes. But if you can do it with the board backward, that's a big help, because you might be doing a line at some point in the future. You end up with the board facing the wrong way. If you can do a nice shove-it and get your board faced back the direction you're trying to go, that's going to help. And when you get those shove-its, make sure you post them on Instagram with the hashtag ShredSchool101, which I will watch. I'll watch them all. I will pick a winner, my favorite person who was able to follow along throughout the whole thing. You don't have to land every single trick in the course, but you at least have to try them and put in that effort, and the person that I like most will get the prize. Next week on the Shred School, we're going to learn the front side 180 ollie, which is a way to spin you and your board around and land backwards. It's a really good way to expand the amount of tricks that you can do, expand your options. So that's a really good trick. Make sure you are subscribed so you can see that one next week. If you like the video, hit the like button, share it with your friends. You can sponsor me on Patreon. You can hit the join button here. But most importantly, work on those tricks, and I'll see you next week for the next one.